And we're live. I suppose that this may come as a bit random and out there. We did have intentions by some part to do streams, and for reasons or another, it's just no fell into place. And we're obviously a bit cautious of trying to know interfere with other people's streams. So, pardon the randomness, but we didn't want to sign off 2023 without having a wee bit of back and forth and saying cheerio. But nonetheless, here we are. Myself, DJ, Clive No Show. Don't know where he is. Probably in McDonald's or some vegan cafe, nonetheless. But I hope he's doing well. We've got DJ here with us. DJ, how's it going? Everything all good?
It has to be said. This Sunday with the lads, got to be the most rescheduled stream in recent history. This is like the third time now. It was initially supposed to happen several weeks ago, and then the pothole incident occurred for me. And then the next time it was supposed to come around, you got yourself ill, and then we postponed yet again, and it was agreed to be done tonight. And Clive Chance has decided to just disappear. It's like, you know what? Might as well just throw our hands up and admit defeat at this point. you know, it's looking like it's never going to be. And I firmly blame Clive Chance.
It would have been better if it was a trio, but for a lot of folk that probably used to watch the Sunday stream every week, next year, once the streams are up and running, I will address the reasons in full why I have had long absences. And when I do, in all honesty, I believe a lot of people will understand why that is. Because I've had a couple of comments back and forth. Some of them is a wee bit banter, other ones are kind of I'm assuming just in personal interest, what the hell's been happening.
Right.
So I'll address that. There's absolutely no malice. It's all love. But I suppose if folk want to know, then that's fine. I'm happy to share. I've just not wanted to get into everything with the nature of everything that's happened. But nonetheless, it's yourself, myself, the Grissom Twosome. So what's been happening anyway?
Not a great deal, to be honest. I mean, I will say to what you said there, as long as people know that you're all right and whatnot, then I don't really think you need to divulge any more than that. I mean, for a good while after you sort of disappeared off YouTube and Telegram and whatnot, there was a period of time where everybody was asking 24/7, "Are you all right? Are you all right? Are you all right?" But that sort of petered out as the months went on. But I think it was just more they weren't sure if anything had happened in a negative sense. But when you eventually did start to reappear again, all those sort of concerns were quelled anyway. But you're not really obligated to tell people what the fuck's going on in your life, to be honest. But aye, apart from that though, not really a lot. I mean, this year's just been a bit of a washout in terms of like everything Scottish related. I mean, my personal life is a massive positive in regards to if you compare that to this time last year. Massive positive difference. Steady job, steady relationship, and whatnot. Whereas this time last year, the least said about that, the better. Everybody has their ups and downs and whatnot. But no, I would like to say that next year's we're going to see a significant improvement in terms of Scottish things related, but nah, let's be honest, mate. It's going to be the same shite, different year. But no, not really a lot to report, in all honesty.
I think it's been an interesting year because although I haven't been hands-on on the streams or on Telegram, I have been watching a number of things from afar, and there has been one absolute golden nugget in all of this, and regardless of how people look at it, we'll address the biggest elephant in the room, and that's Hamza Yusuf.
Hmm.
He has done more to divide a political united Scotland than any other politician that could have possibly been put in that chair. And see for that, for the laughs, for the absolute opportunistic, desperate, cherry picking moments to try and become trendy or popular or viral, and how it's been nothing but more than an absolute deterrent to him and a deterrent to that party in particular. It's been wonderful. It's been absolutely wonderful viewing. Sure, there's been a lot of shit that's happened, but that one singular thing to pull people away from the political conversation and just to see for, I suppose, how shambolic and how non-functional the Holyrood Assembly really is has been pleasing.
Well, I mean, as far as the SNP are concerned, 2023 has without doubt been the worst year, um, arguably they've ever had. You know, it's just been one thing after another, all culminating with, as you mentioned, Hamza Yusuf. Like, come on, really? Anybody you could have put into that position to allegedly rule the roost, you put in arguably the most detested man in politics. I mean, it doesn't matter where he goes, he's forever hounded by his infamous white speech. You know, he's hated for his hate crime bill. He's hated apparently by the vast majority of Muslims in Scotland for his so-called progressive politics. He's just an odious redacted, you know, and yet he's been thrown into this position and continuing on from where Nicola Thinlips left off and branded as the continuity candidate at the time. It's not really going too well for him, has to be said. But I think, arguably, if you really pay any attention to how voting works and whatnot, you could potentially see. I've made the point. I don't think you're going to see the end of the SNP, but I would think that him being in that position would be enough to ensure they don't win anywhere near as many votes as they once upon a time did. And that's with them dangling their daft little independence carrot. I think those days are somewhat behind them. And on top of that, I'll just add a final point. Bear in mind as well all the cancerous sort of politics and policies that you've seen being thrown about and proposed and suggested in the last several months. And the sort of spotlight's been heavily placed, rightfully so, on the Greens. And this is a party who obviously are the only reason that the SNP retain any sort of power within Holyrood. But it's their insanity that has been heavily criticised at present. So more power to the people shining the spotlight on that, because the more that that is the case, the less credibility and support I would argue the SNP will have going forward.
You know, it's a weird one. I will say this before I get into this. Steve, hopefully the wee one, you know, gets well. You know, Godspeed. Nothing worse when folk are absolutely ill. And on that one, Clive's put into your chat that he's actually come down with a sickness. His whole house is ill, so we wish obviously him and the family all the best, and hopefully they get well soon. Seems to be a lot doing the rounds at the moment, but you know, the SNP. It's I think a lot of people are looking at it and thinking, right, we've got people from, with the greatest respects, Bangladesh and fucking Ecuador and all the rest of it coming over, and you can be you're just as Scottish as you and I on one hand, and then the Greens on the other hand are trying to convince parents that little George can be Gillian, and the whole thing is coming down very slowly, but still coming down like a house of cards. And 2023 has kind of been a year that's, I suppose, with many fronts, that's been pushed by the COVID protests, pushed by the big pharma scandals, pushed by all the fucking just stop oil and Extinction Rebellion and freak show bastards of the day, and just to round it all off, the whole conflict that's going over in the letterbox that is known as the Middle East is just kind of a galvanised that momentum to push it over the line for 2024. 2024, I believe, is going to be an absolute car crash, but an equally sublime year at that, nonetheless. I do see that we've actually got your good lady in the chat. We've got Streaky Bacon and we've got Mark Ritchie. So
It's her
for the
birthday
troops that are
today,
here,
actually.
is it?
So
Well,
happy birthday, PB.
happy birthday, missus. I hope you have an absolute good one. Hopefully, the halal guy here gets you something really nice.
Of course. And there was a wee question here as well from Mark Ritchie. A wee bit up, if you can see that. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Has the engineered collapse of the SNP damaged independence or given it a new, more realistic focus? Well, the thing is, excuse me, I don't think that it has. I think to a degree, I believe the SNP has caused a problem with the demise of the independence campaign, but that's through reasons of individualistic egos getting in the way of a united principle push for the party itself. I think a lot of the way that the smoke fell out with the whole salmon split and the things that the SNP done, the whole legality side of things from the aftermath had kind of upset an already divided camp. I don't think that there's a new focus for independence. I believe it's an absolute minority at that. I don't see. In fact, I would say that the Palestinian protests of the last few weeks have been more consistently publicised and probably have retained a consistently bigger audience than many independence rallies combined over the course of this year. I don't think there's an appetite for independence. I think there's an appetite to clean house in Holyrood. People may disagree with that, which is absolutely fine. But I think a lot of people have switched off from independence because there's too many issues now on the doorstep where people aren't looking at the bigger picture. They're absolutely worried about what's happening in schools. They're worried about the whole critical race theory, the gender bill, wee lassies being able to go to toilets without any creepy toms kicking about. So, yeah, I'd suspect that 2024 will be a desperate carrot, but I don't think many will buy into it. I don't know if you agree with that, DJ, but that's my quid on that one.
Um, it's a tough one. I mean, I've never really been in the position of making predictions, but it's a very difficult one to sort of put my finger on. Yeah, I mean, made no secret of my absolute unadulterated hatred for the SNP. Always have hated them, but I don't necessarily know if the current things that have occurred all across this year will be enough to finish them off. I sort of think that the jury's out on that one, but I do think that without a doubt, they've lost a good chunk of support that they're going to struggle to gain back. But then you also have to take into consideration their sort of deliberate attempt over the years to blur the lines between independence in its literal form and EU membership. So that's two separate, voter blocks that they've combined into one by making independence synonymous with EU membership. That and the fact that Scotland's sort of in the unique position in comparison to other parts of the UK where point blank they refuse to vote Tory and they don't really want to vote Labour anymore. They're disillusioned Labour voters. So the SNP have always got that going for them. But as far as policy and whatnot's concerned, I mean, you mentioned there the the gender bill. There's like the things that are coming into fruition just as of like the beginning of next year is the conversion therapy ban. Then you've got the misogyny bill. Then you've got the hate crime bill, right? These are just three of many different things that are coming to the equation to kickstart off 2024. And this has obviously been a long running theme where like the vast majority of absolute cancer that we're seeing in Scotland. It's all thanks to a party who keep getting in year upon year, every election, by promising independence. The question, I suppose, though, is whether or not that is enough now to win them more seats going forward. I don't know. Really don't know. But I will say as well to Mark Ritchie's comment there that he's more pro-independence now than he ever was, but he detests the SNP. Well, I mean, you presumably know, like my history, my backstory in regards to how I got to where I was. You might not necessarily know Scott's Armour's backstory to which explains how he got to where he is now at present. But let me just sort of reiterate quickly, as far as I'm concerned, that I went from being an avid independent supporter. On paper, you could effectively say I tick every single box for an old school, legitimate, literal Scottish nationalist in its most literal sense. But now, no, I'm not a unionist, never have been, but firstly, I think that the idea of independence is just an absolute distraction and a divide for this country. Now is not the time nor the place. But second of all, the sort of independence that's being proposed and has been proposed for some time now isn't actually independence. It's simply leaving the UK in order to rejoin the EU. So in that respect, they can get fucked. But yeah, like I just think it's a distraction.
Yeah, I mean, see when you look at the independence campaign that built up to 2014, from what they were talking about then to what's kind of been, I suppose, I like to wither away, and now it's been presented, are two completely different set of talking points. Where it was kind of like, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to reinvest money. People that has seen the white paper, for if you like it or if you didn't like it, you agreed with it, you didn't agree with it, put that aside, right? Just think about it like this. They were going to use oil, they were going to reinvest, they were going to bring a lot of infrastructure in, which meant there was going to be a lot of jobs, there would be an economic boom. Regardless of how you seen the inflation or whatever else, just think about it like that. There was a lot of things that sounded really good, and it could appease people, if you want to call them working poor, what I call them working class, or people just in general poverty. There was a lot of things there that looked good on paper. Now, fast forward X amount down the line, we have people coming in quite literally on wooden doors across the channel, like a scene at the fucking Titanic, being told that they're getting full rights, they're getting the same identity as people like you and I. They are being told that they will have a say on our future. They're having a controlling push on the dilution of our culture. We are being tied into bureaucratic, centralised governments that no one, frankly, asked for. So, in the sense of independence, from what it was to what it is now, is two different worlds. And looking at it for what it has been over the last, nearly 10 to 12 years, because you've got to think about when they originally started campaigning for this, I would say it's been the biggest singular tool to bring Scottish people into a state of disarray. They dissected the people culturally, emotionally, spiritually. They have done a lot of work within working class cities to divide the very roots of communities through absolute fear propaganda. Now, I'm not sitting here and turning and saying that everything is totally bad, because there's been a lot of good things that have come out of that, and that's basically been the political function of this country. And now there's a lot of new eyes looking at things right across. People that are a lot more articulate, intelligent, and do a hell of a lot better job than myself. Every day is a learning day. But one thing is absolutely clear with that parliament. It is not fit for purpose. It does not serve the Indigenous Scot. It's a theatre of globalist shells pushing a globalist agenda. And the more that you indulge with something that basically is to erode the soul of the common Scot, the more you will fall into that trap of accepting everything that they're pushing. And for a government that wants to put Scotland on the map, to absolute piss all over Scotland's unique identity, which is literally written within our Declaration of Arbroath, our very unique founding stone, to have laws as recognised sovereign people in this country, to be pretty much, Abdul from Afghanistan or wee Jamal fucking Moki boy from the Jungle Book can come over here and they're equally Scottish is nothing more than an absolute spit in the face to the people who built this very nation, who helped shape our fucking country's destiny, all for the sake of a couple of quid and a thumb up the arse of George Soros. Fuck each and every one of them.
Mm. No, that's what I've always found perplexing. You hear quite, and it's always from the opposition as well. I mean, if you really want to play into the sort of political to and fro from commentators and whatnot, YouTube is one example, but not limited to. Even newspapers, YouTubers, or whatever other platform, Twitter, etc. These people that are classified as unionists, and they'll spend a lot of their time chastising things that the SNP or the government are doing and saying, etc. But they fall for it all the time, and they can't be that stupid. They keep calling them nationalists, the Nats, the Scot Nats, the nationalists, etc. And I know it's sort of preaching to the choir at this point. I'm under no illusion that it needs to be reiterated again, but I will just for the record. There is nothing nationalistic about a party who are on record as disavowing the term nationalist. But on top of that, there's nothing nationalistic about anything that party, the SNP in particular, have done for years, for the longest time. Nothing at all screams out nationalistic whatsoever. But even the coof stuff, right? All that nonsense. That I think that should have been a real eye opener for people. And even now, to this day, it's always staggered me how much people are prepared to buy into revisionist history. Right? There's a narrative that will not die that Nicola Thinlips would do everything within her power to ensure that all CUF policies, all restrictions were twice as hard and polar opposite to whatever Boris Johnson did, right? This is the narrative that's still on display today. But yeah, from my memory, I just remember Boris Johnson and whomever else he was with that day coming out to their podiums to dictate the latest amount of deaths, etc., and then dictate the latest amount of restrictions. Fast forward half an hour each and every day, Nicola Thinlips and the gay dentist would come out to do the same thing. There was nothing different nor independent in relation to Boris Johnson's little speech and Nicola Sturgeon's little speech. But for some reason, even to this day, there's a narrative that has managed to solidify her as different. She'll do whatever she can to be against Westminster. No, not really. But remember as well back then that she was touted as being the most trustworthy politician during the COVID stuff when it began and for the duration of the restriction period. She was branded as being the most trustworthy politician. Even people in England were tuning in to watch Nicola Thinlips at her podium. She has had this sort of pedestal placed in her, and she had done for so long, where she could do no wrong. And this wasn't just limited to the COVID stuff, obviously. This went well before that in time, and even after, really, till the gender stuff, of course, which kind of ties into Mark Ritchie's comment earlier on, where you could make the argument there's an aspect of this that was orchestrated purely because it was just an absolute shit show. Nicola Sturgeon had this good thing going for many a year where she was always in a position where she could never be challenged. She would get the most simplistic and easy of questions and whatnot, which always helped to sort of cement SNP power. I've even heard Clive make reference to the fact she was a good speaker. I mean, I agree, she was within reason. And I think that was part of the problem for so long. People are obviously, no matter where you live, people by and large are sort of dictated to by the media. They sort of form their opinions and whatnot on what they hear from the media. And for the longest time in a Scottish context, the SNP could do no wrong and have done no wrong. So I guess, yes, there's question marks now over why that's all changed. I don't know. But Hamza Yusuf has got to be the most egregious replacement for her known to man. I'd like to think this will be the end of them. But before I sort of ramble off away on a tangent, no, I just wanted to bring that up about her and COVID. That stuff really pissed me off with how much her praises were sung from every aspect of the media. You know,
I think, like we've seen it over a number of years, a lot of women, when it comes down to how they're portrayed in the media, are kind of given this power status where it doesn't matter how wrong or spectacularly fucking they put the brick through the window when handling affairs, they're still empowered by that necessity of women leadership. And Mark had spoke about something to do with um, the my concession would to be admit that England saved us from the worst of COVID. Without English people, we would have been like New Zealand. Now, the subject in New Zealand's an interesting one because, quite frankly, Jacinda Ardern, first and foremost, looks like she should be racing at Cheltenham. The woman literally looks like a fucking horse. And the way that she dealt with a lot of the, if you want to call it, the quote unquote rules, the established parameters for, us mere mortals, what we can and cannot do, she was absolutely fucking ruthless. She done a lot of damage to the people in New Zealand, and no one batted an eyelid about it. And it was the exact same here in Scotland. People were hooked up into residential care units. They were denied to go to hospital with bad flus. A lot of people died behind doors. We still don't know the full figures on that. We do know there's a government inquiry into it. But Nicola Sturgeon came out of that smelling of roses. If these people, these two ladies in particular, had been any sort of non-left fielded male candidates, I guarantee the ruthlessness of the media would have come down on them as an absolute whirlwind. Make no mistake about it. And the reason why we know this is take Boris Johnson out of the picture. Every other male candidate in the Western world was pretty much given the same treatment. Now, on the COVID question, I still think there is a lot of mental lethargicness with people in regards to that. I think that people are still a bit, the way that they talk, like they were living in, and this may upset folk, and it's not meant to upset you. It's just, again, my opinion, as if we were in a real pandemic. The way that people talk about it, and I think to myself, there's grannies and grandas that live up and down this country that lived through the wars, that lived on rationing, and they grew up in schemes that were literally bombed and everything else in between. But God forbid, you've got little George and Georgina who couldn't go out to do TikTok videos, and they couldn't, go out with their wee college pals, and they never had enough to go and get toilet roll and stuff like that. That's not a pandemic. It was a fucking bad cold season, and people swallowed the fear porn. People were left to die. And the thing is, you catch a flu, folks. You can die. It's always been a thing. That's nothing new. That's no some kind of I've completed the Rubik's Cube moment. That has always been a real scientific statistic. The services, and I suppose the chief medical officer kind of underlined a lot of things early on. I don't know if you remember it, DJ, you probably will. That lassie that got effectively, quote unquote, no sacked, but kind of if you leave in a dignified response, it will be all right. We're all sitting watching the people in this country in lockdown, not being able to attend funerals, not being able to go and see their loved ones, not being able to have days out with their children. But the chief medical officer, who is an absolute pharmaceutical whore, standing in front of a podium on national television, don't do it, folks, or you'll die. But then was caught abusing those restrictions to go to your wee holiday cottage because her kids deserved a break. if she doesn't have the absolute stress and concern for her children's welfare, but is ramming that down your throat, that was the first big red flag for me. Truly, because that, as much as I had my doubts and I was sceptical, her language and her actions were worlds apart from the obvious what should have happened in that situation. And a lot of people just totally overlooked it again because she was a female representative in a position of power and they were just thinking, ah, we all make mistakes. But now I believe the country is slowly waking up, slowly coming to a realisation that the people of Scotland, God forbid, and I don't really like putting it this way, bent here and took an absolute fear porn dicking over that longevity period of COVID. Don't know how you feel about it, DJ, but that was my 2 quid on it.
Catherine Calderwood. That was our PBC in the chat there. You know, I always get called an autistic by Clive. Meet my missus, the autistic female equivalent.
Thank you very much for that.
Happy birthday.
Only you,
no,
mate. You
that
met
was
your match.
she even Clive said that he called us an autistic power couple. That was his exact framing of wording when we were on a stream. Like you fuck off, Clive. But anyway, her, I remember that well. I do remember, and I remember how the media went hard on her after that, and they framed it as if her breaking her own rules sort of discredits the rules because they're really effective. But as far as I was concerned at the time, it was more about the fact that if she's going to stand there and spout what we should do and why we should do it, because there's an actual threat out there, but yet she's not prepared to follow her own rules, that suggested to me that she wasn't that concerned. And of course, she wasn't the only one. You know, many others followed after that, and there was multiple different so-called scandals of politicians breaching their own rules and whatnot. She wasn't the only one, of course, but I mean, same thing for me. Early doors. I mean, the videos are still on my channel, really, which is quite funny to listen back to. I remember when it first started in 2020, and then I remember the first video I made about it, which actually got banned for medical misinformation, despite the fact I never actually said it. But then my second video, it was just me sort of addressing some of the stuff that was hitting the British media. Then my third video was me going, all right, this is weird. And that was, funnily enough, Catherine Calderwood. And I got the clip. I played the clip where she said that as of now, British doctors and GPs and whatnot have been given the green light to diagnose any death in hospital as being COVID related, provided there's any symptoms and whatnot. And this is despite having to test them. And I remember thinking, well, that's a bit weird, given that COVID symptoms are identical to flu symptoms and even pneumonia symptoms. How can you then, in turn, diagnose a death as being as being COVID when you don't know if that's what they had? I thought that was strange because you could make the argument that that could artificially inflate numbers. Then, as time went on that year, we've seen that care home deaths were rising exponentially to such a point that by the end of 2020, they made up more than half of the overall Scottish death count. And then the worst thing about it all was the fact that despite all of what they were saying and whatnot, when you crunch the numbers, it still wasn't as bad as the 2017 flu season that swept across Scotland. And then it became quite clear that there was something a bit iffy about it all. And then, obviously, the shite that followed as the years went on. And there we are where we are, really. I mean, yes, we've come out the other side of it. And I don't necessarily think that if they said tomorrow that we need to go back into lockdown and whatnot, that people would be as quick to sort of jump to their tune. But you could make the argument, and I have to be somewhat cautious of what's said going forward, given the fact that YouTube has a tendency to bump you off if you say naughty things in this regard, in this pertaining to this genre. But I just don't think that people are as susceptible to it anymore in this particular thing. I don't know if they were to come out tomorrow and say that there was a brand new strain of a brand new illness and whatnot, that people might be a bit wary and whatnot. But as far as the coof, I think it's died a death, really. But that said, never ever forget, and that's something that people across Scotland did forget and have forgotten, Never ever forget that Nicola Thinlips, the be all and end all, the woman who cares about Scotland, who's going to get you your independence, she was just as much complicit in all that shit the same way that Westminster were. And to the few comments that came through earlier on regarding Sturgeon and Boris and whatnot from Mark Ritchie and PBC, to be clear here, towards the latter half of when restrictions were still in place, Thin Lips did go above and beyond and ensure that she did things for longer and she went harder, lock me down harder, daddy. Right? But at the beginning, she wasn't. 2020 going into 2021, whatever Boris said, Sturgeon said half an hour later. That was the status quo.
Oh, aye. If there was a small lockdown period for a month, Sturgeon was doing 2.5 months. Aye. And do you know something? I remember having conversations with folk that I know who aren't the way inclined or thinking that I am, and they were even noticing how fucking blatantly obvious that repetitive behaviour had become, and actually started questioning a lot of the reasons why is that such a necessity, why should we be doing that with every decision, why is it going on this amount of time. It's like the whole country had opened up that social care in Scotland were still operating with masks on. It's a whole strange thing. But see, fast forwarding just a wee bit down the line, we've seen an absolute copy and paste reaction with the fear porn to the way things played with the Russia Ukraine situation. We had people on social media and flags and pubs and everything else in this country, people hanging Ukraine flags at their window. I stand in solidarity with Ukraine because I don't support the war crimes of Putin. And you sit and you look and you think, right, okay, here we go. Can you show us some, rational proof that the Ukrainians are being blown to bits? And let's obviously underline something early on. The tensions between Ukraine and Russia has been there for well over a decade anyway. So we had seen this national campaign over a longevity of several months to build up to start bringing the Ukrainians in. I think at one point they had them at the docks of the Clyde on yachts because this was coming up to the end of COVID, just after COVID, if I'm correct. They never had anywhere for these Ukrainian quote unquote refugees to go. So they left them on boats. And after a conditioned period of time where they're like, right, okay, the Ukrainians are coming, we started having a lot of Tyrones and Deshons quite literally coming out of nowhere, claiming that they're Ukrainian, and a lot of people going, oh, those pure Ukrainian souls, and with the greatest respect, they were darker than my shadow walking down a fucking non-lit alley in Glasgow city centre. But I mean, that's fine. Nobody questioned that narrative either. They just swallowed that like good old fashioned cough medicine. And it's took an awful long time through this campaign to such a degree that I think it took up until probably the Erskine Hotel situation in Scotland. I know over in Ireland it's been somewhat different. A lot of the Irish are now starting to wake up to the full extent of who's in their hotels. But the Ukraine one, that's one that I kind of I feel strange about, because some people eventually got there in the end, but it was like they had to go through every single point and hoop and hurdle before they got to the destination. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has came to the same final destination on that one, because in Glasgow there is still a lot of fucking Ukrainian flags up, same with the Palestinian ones. But I think the Ukraine situation was somewhat really in a strange fashion at the timing of it, because it's like as everything had just started to quiet down from that COVID thing. That's kind of a blow up escalations where people didn't really escape that fear porn for another long period of time. Again, DJ, like you've got your own thoughts and opinions on that, but that's kind of been one that's even carried right out throughout the course of this year to such a degree that the Zelensky's doing his Spice Girls tour still asking for shekels with the cap in hand.
Aye, that's where the meme comes from, isn't it? The current thing, you know. I don't really think it was such a popular turn of phrase until post Kuf, because obviously it was Ukraine, and then just as quickly as it was Ukraine, it all of a sudden became the current thing at present with the Middle East. But as far as Ukraine was concerned, and what I'm saying here does not by any means sort of dismiss any of the stuff that's taking place in Ukraine and was taking place in Ukraine. But for me, from near enough day dot, I've just been off the impression, and I'm yet to be proven wrong. I'm yet to see proof otherwise. For me, it was just sort of the continuation of what was going on with everything Kuf related. In terms of Kuf, to me, was sort of the precursor to um, sorry, stopping economies, putting a sort of halt on oil and gas distribution, and sort of putting the cogs into motion to push us towards a revolution, the green revolution. And then obviously Papa Putin, the big based Russian man, comes along and just invades Ukraine, and all of a sudden, gas prices go up. You know, like everything goes up, petrol prices, wheat, all these things go up. But there's been a heavy emphasis now on the need to sort of move away from our reliance on fossil fuels, right? Because even though we've got our own, we still depend on the likes of Russia. There's been a heavy emphasis on moving away from fossil fuels now in favor of green alternatives. And the excuse is always, and has been since this stuff started, it's always been Papa Putin. Everything is Papa Putin's fault, and I found it quite perplexing, really, to witness purely on the basis of so many people, like in our spheres and whatnot. They think the sun shines out his arse. They think he's such a great guy. And why? Because he said some based and red pill things about gays. Oh, wow. Has he now? Fantastic. My grandmother said some based and red pill things about gays. It doesn't mean that I would support her if she was in charge of a fucking country. Some people have even gone so far as to say, unironically, that they hope he invades the UK to save us all from the degeneracy. It's very, very weird. And I think people have kind of got into this sort of weird psychosis where whatever the media promote and support, you must do the opposite. Therefore, if they're in favor of Ukraine, you must be vehemently in support of based and red pill Russian Papa fucking Putin. It's been perplexing, right? All you need to do is go into Google and type in Russia Sustainable Development Goals, and lo and behold, they are just up to their neck in it the same way that everybody else is. So again, just let me sort of reiterate here, I can't help but feel that the invasion of Ukraine, I'm not saying that it's not legitimate, but what I am saying is this: never let a good crisis go to waste. And what you have seen since that shite started has been a heavy emphasis on moving away from fossil fuels. The wheels are in motion, and everything is based in red pill, really racist, base Chad Papa Putin's fault.
That's exactly why people tune in. Because when you get the fat between the fucking teeth, you chew, mate. You chew and you fucking you take it to task. Again, there's a lot of things. I don't really know the full truths, the 100%, and that's something that I like to try and get right. I won't always get it right because there's always a degree of information that you won't know.
Right.
But there's enough abundance of like people in Kiev and etc. all over Ukraine. We've seen videos of normal people sitting at bars and restaurants apparently whilst they were meant to have fucking bombs dropping on them. And the whole thing just absolutely reeked of bullshit. No,
Yeah,
I'm not saying it
sorry.
wasn't.
Sorry to interrupt there, but one other thing came in my head that I should have probably included in my initial speech there. I think one of the most classic examples to showcase that this has been such a gay up in terms of exploiting a quote unquote crisis is the sanction fiasco, right? So our cost of living crises that we're all in simultaneously, right? Inflation sky high because of COVID money printing, etc. But let's not go into that. Can't talk about that. But the point is, though, our countries have been further entrenched into poverty. And one of the excuses that they've used since this shit started is the sanctions on Russia, right? All of the sanctions on Russia we've been placing upon them. We've been doing this while Europe, in particular, has continued to buy energy from Russia. So even if these sanctions had any effect whatsoever to sort of put them off the idea of continuing their invasion, they're making that money back via the back door due to fucking energy being bought off them. So the only person, the only people, the only countries that have actually lost anything and as a result made their countries worse off since implementing sanctions is the people implementing the sanctions. That should tell you all you need to know, really. Anyway, sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, like, there's a comment made by Mark, and Mark, I'm not trying to pick at anything in particular here, mate. I really aren't. You had made a comment about something to do with Palestine. Ukraine does not equal Palestine. The first is a psyop, the latter is a genocide. Well, I'd have to disagree with that, mate, and absolutely make it abundantly clear right now. I am no friend of Israel. It's a country I do not like. It's a history of a people that I do not like and do not care for. But that the same, I extend that royally to the Palestinians. If we look at I think it was a few decades ago, you can go and check this out. The first Palestinian refugees, quote unquote refugees, that left Palestine and into Lebanon, they massacred and murdered and raped Christian people in Lebanon simply for being Christians. There was no international outrage. There was no Lebanese flags in the street. There was no international condemnation. The same Palestinian refugees went into Jordan and caused a lot of problems in Jordan. Some of the places that these people have went have changed the historical and cultural roots of these individual nations round about to such a degree where they've been pretty much Islamically colonised as it can be. Furthermore, and this is only something that's recently came out, and this is by an Arab blogger called Hoda Jannat, and apparently, right, how much truth is this? I do not know, but apparently, from Islamic sources, this seems to be the nail on the head and 100% truth. That Gaza, which is inhabited by 2 million people, has 36 hospitals. That's more hospitals than there is universities in Scotland. Also, Gaza receives over $30 million a month from Qatar, 120 million from the UNRWA, 50 million a month from the European Union, 30 million a month from the US, amongst other huge benefactors that put money into that fucking little piece of land. There is an abundance of resources in Palestine, and none whatsoever have come out and condemned Hamas. Now, it's quite an interesting thing here because we're led to believe one thing on the television about poor Palestine and the Gaza Strip, like we were told Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons and it turned out to be a whole load of hocus pocus. I think we're seeing another theatre by some degree playing out in front of us. I also think that if you listen to the Jews when they talk about their war with the European people, they always use a reference back and forth, and you've got to really pay attention to catch up and hear it for what it is. The expression goes, Islam is the sweeping brush for the Israeli cause, the Israeli agenda. That is pretty much it in a nutshell. The two of them are interlinked because you can be a Muslim and go into a synagogue and worship. You can be a Jew and go into a mosque and worship because the two of them fundamentally believe in the same God, but the both of them can't go into a Christian place and worship because they believe in a different God altogether. The two of them are the same branches of the same root, and it doesn't matter if you're blue and white or if you're green, white, black, and red, or whatever bullshit colours are on that bullshit flag. The main point of this ploy that's been played out over a numerous long time is to pretty much Arabize the European nations. The Jewish cartels will take an abundance of refugees and they will plummet them into Europe through the NGO, and the Palestinians and the Arabs are the actors and the universal foot soldiers to come in and have government overthrow. So when we're looking at that situation, it is very important that we're careful and we're being as rational as we possibly can be with ourselves, trying to be integrally honest, because myself, and I'm not going to sit here and say I have always got it right, myself have been caught into some situations where I thought, Jesus, that's incredibly sad, and it's turned out I've been done hook, line, and sinker, mate. So that's all I'm going to say on that subject. DJ, I don't know if you've got an opinion on the Middle East. If you do, let's hear it. If not, it's fine. We can carry on into something else.
I wouldn't necessarily say I've got much of an opinion. Like, put it this way, I don't have the same strong opinions that I had about the sort of Ukraine debacle as I do with this. But what I will say is that Telegram has been pretty damn insightful in if you compare that to the sort of mainstream media, because you get this sort of one-sided version of events via the mainstream media. Again, kind of going back to what I said earlier on, people are led by the nose. They'll, whatever they consume in the media via the TV, that's what they believe for the most part. Whereas Telegram, and this is obviously the first instance of that being the case. This has been the case for a long enough on Telegram. You sort of see the alternative. You see a lot of videos and sources and whatnot that you wouldn't necessarily see if all you did was watch knobs on BBC or whatever. And I've seen a lot of heinous things in relation to this so-called war in the Middle East. And it has to be said that if ever there was calls for war crimes to be put on the table, you could make that case. Yes, of course. It has to be said that there's always unnecessary and unfortunate casualties of war. It's just the very nature of war. But it seems to be pretty damn one-sided in regards to what's going on. That said, though, I'm not really taking any side, because quite frankly, it's got fuck all to do with me. It's got nothing to do with Scotland. It's got nothing to do with, well, it shouldn't, in theory, have anything to do with anything that's happening internally and domestically. So I'm not really going to be sort of browbeaten into sort of taking a position, and I'm not for 1 second suggesting that's what the dude in the chat was on about, but I just mean overall. I mean, we've all got our own issues, and quite frankly, there's a fucking lot of them taking place in Scotland at present. Going into 2024, there's going to be a hell of a lot more. To sit and fixate over the war that's going on in the Middle East when it has really no bearing on your day-to-day life, unless they start importing these people here to escape war. Unless that happens, then realistically, it's got nothing to do with us. So that's all I can really say on that front.
I think that's a bit of a bigoted take. I mean, your First Minister's wife's family lives over there. You should be doing a lot more. You should be doing a lot more, mate.
100-odd people that were rescued and allowed out, it all of a sudden just so happens to be his family. I mean, yes, I don't know, man. It's just there's a lot of sort of weird question marks over it. It has to, on the flip side as well, though. I mean, wow, the amount of like people on Twitter and whatnot who are just totally exposing the sort of corruption that's taking place with our friends that we can't really talk about by name. That wasn't really a thing prior to that. It wasn't even allowed, but it's becoming hard to sort of argue. It's it's been hard. It's hard to ignore it now. So yes, there's obviously that aspect of it, but as far as like coming away with like a concrete take or that's not really for me to say.
Well, let me ask you this, then, right? And you probably won't have much to say on it either, right? But I want your take on, I suppose, if we're looking at things rationally and trying to be truthful as we possibly can be, right? Do you think it's a little bit somewhat disingenuous, right, that we've had the Ukraine and Russia war absolutely pulled down our throat, right? We've had the immigration need to take all these, Johns and Josephs, the doctors and the bricklayers of the world, because they're fleeing war to spite going through an abundance of countries that aren't war related, but that's neither here nor there. And we've got this Palestine and Israel take on it, right? But there has been not one single mainstream news in the West that has touched us on a day-to-day basis the way that they have done with the three events that I've just discussed there. And that's the genocide of the Armenians done by the Azerbaijani government. It's a Christian nation that's been blown to smithereens by a hostile Islamic takeover. I just find that somewhat sketchy because we've been reminded by Biden, by Macron, by the whole lot of them that war crimes and war in general has to be confronted head on. But there has been absolute diddly squeak, especially from what we just said there about Hamza Yusuf coming out and saying all this. Basically, it's a crime against Islam and all this hocus pocus buzzword terminology, but yet has not uttered a single word, even in our Holyrood Parliament, have not uttered a singular word about the Armenian people being genocide. I think that's very telling, mate. I think that's very telling.
It's funny you say that, actually. I remember, wait, let me just share the screen for this, because this is an old article that I remember making a video on at the time. This sort of sums up what you're saying. Tell me when you can see that.
There we go, mate. It's up.
Do you not remember this? This was 2019. Christian persecution at near genocidal levels, right? And it says down here that the persecution of Christians in parts of the world is at near genocide levels, according to a report ordered by Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt. The review, led by the Bishop of Truro, the Right Reverend Philip Mount, estimated that 1 in 3 people suffer from religious persecution, with Christians being the most persecuted religious group. Mr. Hunt said it felt that political correctness had played a part in the issue not being confronted, right? This was in 2019. And I remember following that report, and I remember the video at the time. I never clipped the entirety of the speech. This was back in the day when I didn't clip speeches. I sort of recorded little bits and then reacted to them. The old retarded way to do it. I remember clipping a segment from the Parliament where that very report was brought up, and then the question was posed to a Scottish Government minister. Given the recent findings from said report, and given the fact that in recent times we've agreed on a definition for Islamophobia and for that to be a protected hate crime characteristic and whatnot, should we not apply the same, protections to Christians? And I can't remember from memory the sort of shitey excuse that was given by the SNP minister, but to put it this way, it was effectively brushing it off, right? And that's sort of standard practice. It's even applicable today. You see time and time again where all these different sort of minority groups are protected under law and whatnot, but there's never the same protections nor sympathies and whatnot extended to Christians, which is quite baffling, really, when you consider the fact that, historically speaking, in a Scottish context, we've always been a sort of Christian country. And my sort of hypothesis back in the day, it's not really changed now, is partly that to extend the sort of protections to Christians that you've extended to every other minority group and whatnot, you are by extension sort of giving protection to white people. Yeah, low-hanging fruit hot take from me. The vast majority of Christians in Scotland are white, so we can't be having that. That's sort of my first and foremost sort of hot take about it. But on a more sort of level-headed approach, I think part of the reason that worldwide there's no sort of acknowledgement nor nothing being done to tackle the fact that in multiple countries across the world, Christians are, as that report would suggest, like persecuted at near genocidal levels, is because by hook or by crook, what you are sort of dealing with is a satanic cabal, and by extension, satanic cabals, kind of Cheech and Chong, they obviously by extension don't really like Christianity all too much. So I think that might very well be the case. That could be total shite from me. It's not really a subject I know all too much about, but no, just that did make me think of that report, because that was probably the first and only time I've ever heard that expressed across the British media. Never again has it ever been mentioned.
Well, I don't know if you remember, right, but I done a stream. Um, I done a stream with Chief Moody in DDJ, and
Oh, I remember that.
we were talking about a number of things. And at that point in time, there was equivalent of like a church or a chapel being burnt down every week in France. In
Yeah.
Canada, it was averaging about five a week. And it's only escalated since then. I mean, last year, right? If we take some figures for last year on Christian persecution, 5,621 Christians murdered, 2,110 churches attacked, 4,542 Christians detained, 1 in 7 Christians are persecuted worldwide, 360 million Christians suffered persecution and discrimination on faith basis alone. And to further, back that up and push for it. We've got some nutcase by the name of Rudy Martinez, who actually looks like a soy drinking, anal bead wearing Mexican Jew. In all honesty, there's no other words for it, I suppose. Has came out and done an article for some wank piece in the US, and it calls for the elimination of whiteness. And in this article, you can see it. It's basically like a banner hanging over some kind of a like, prison wall that's looking over a city, and it says, "White is over. Your DNA is an abomination." Now, again, this is more hateful rhetoric that if this was about any other race or religion of people on the face of this earth, there would have been absolutely outrage from the media, from fucking social influencers. It would have been over TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. They would have probably had celebrities that, calling about international unity and human beings are human beings and all that rainbow shite, about fucking justice and love. But it's not, it's an absolute campaign of persecution purely on the things that we've just spoke about there. That again, people aren't allowed to have an equal platform, because if the truth got out there and people actually realised that these are things that are really happening and the scale of it, of what it truly is, it would collectively wake up people overnight. I don't care if people agree with it or not. I truly believe that in my heart and heart. That's why a lot of things right now are being flagged up on X. You can't say this, you're getting shut down. People's accounts on TikTok are being shut down left, right, and centre. You can't promote European Christianity videos because they're being flagged up as being hateful or inciting violence. Don't know why that is. Jesus wasn't a warlord like Muhammad, unfortunately, but hey ho, that is what it is. So 2023 on a whole, looking at it on that aspect, has been, I suppose, for many people, a hard year, but it has led to some really important conversations that have briefly been able to be afforded to be up on the internet. Sadly, they're not there anymore, but hopefully 2024 is a bit more productive. And I suppose this is going to bring us to the next point and bang on time. Mate, your missus is spooky as fuck. Honestly, I was going to start talking about climate, Paul, and lo and behold, bang, right in there. Climate nonsense is waking a lot of people up right now. And the fact that it is, I mean, it is. A lot of people are now questioning the climate narrative, you science deniers, but hey ho, I love it.
They have, but I think even before you even get to that, you touched on something there as well, which shouldn't be overlooked, and that is the your reference there to whiteness. Like, oh wow, obviously the sort of momentum that was once upon a time a real thing in regards to, thanks to in part my videos about the sort of critical race theory stuff that's taking place in Scotland, there was a sort of organic push. I can't remember what year it was now. It was either last year or the year prior. There was an organic push that was taking place on Twitter where people were actually starting to like call these people out, and specifically the ones that were placed in Scotland, to spout this shite off. And there was this organic sort of momentum building to such a point where the Scottish government had to address it at their fucking conference. They addressed it at their conference. But I mean, wow, Nicola Sturgeon even addressed it a few days before that at First Minister's questions. But it sort of died a death as quick as it ever gained any traction. And ever since then, it's been very difficult to sort of obtain any information on these individuals as they've gone behind their little paywalls and they've all privatized their Twitters and whatnot. Now you get the bare minimum of information, but they are still operating behind the scenes. But this whiteness crap, obviously once upon a time started in American university college campuses, and it's sort of trickled over across the Atlantic, and it's slap bang in Scottish primary schools and in some instances nurseries and high schools, funded completely by the Scottish government, while simultaneously these people, some off, not all, but some off, the more prominent figures, sit on Scottish government panels with the sole aim, as their government website indicated, to reform our curriculum to be via a critical race theory framework, and it has to be said that more needs to be sort of done in terms of exposing these people. If what can be done, difficult to say, given, as I said, information from them is hard to sort of obtain nowadays, but it's definitely something that shouldn't be ignored. That said, though, anyway, on to the climate stuff. What I've always found the most ridiculous about all of that is that you really don't need to come at it with, as Ben Shapiro would say, facts and logic. Just use a bit of common sense. And when I say that, all of the people that are perpetuating this narrative, right? All of them, whether that be in Westminster, whether that be in Holyrood, does not matter, right? All the people that will stand there at podiums and screech and squeal and scream about how the planet is burning to a cinder and we must implement imminent, radical, extreme change or we're all going to fucking die. First and foremost, do not appear convincing, because they will tell you this, then in the next podium appearance, they'll be talking about the rights or lack thereof for trannies. Right, pretty sure your priorities aren't exactly in order when you've got time to talk about gender reform bills. Pretty sure your priorities are not in order when you've got time to talk about eradicating private car use, or all these stupid things that they will spend their time talking about when behind closed doors there's apparently a climate crisis and we're all going to die. Their actions really do not match their rhetoric at times. I found that perplexing. And then, of course, there's obviously the elephant in the room, where you've got COP, a 1 year, an annual event where people from all over the world will fly into whatever destination it is in their CO2 emitting fucking jets to stand there at podiums and talk about CO2 and why it's a detriment, when they could have had these discussions and these meetings at any point throughout the year via Zoom and Skype. And that should be more emphasized, especially given the work at home nonsense and whatnot because of their COVID crap. You would think there would be more of a sort of emphasis on working from home and sitting doing their really intellectual powerhouse-esque meetings via Skype and whatnot. But no, we need to wait once a year for, in this instance, Hamza Yusuf and the cabal to fly into Dubai to talk about CO2. And the same crap is said every single year that was said the year prior, that we've got 1 year left, this is there's no going back, right? Blah, blah, blah. Agreements are made and things are said, and then nothing fucking happens till a year later. It's probably one of the most egregious examples of political skullduggery that any of us have seen in any of our lifetimes. While they sit and point to things within the weather that in a vacuum are not really unnatural in nature, the term natural disaster really should ring some bells for your memory. But no, everything now is all of a sudden climate crisis related, whether it's snow, whether it's arson, not arson, wildfires, or whether it's heat waves, whether it's taking temperatures at airports, right, like they did to apparently proclaim that we've had record-breaking temperatures during the summer. All these different things that they continue to perpetuate could easily be debunked. But we live in a world now where the BBC themselves have even said that we can't have the other side of the debate anymore because the science is settled. Oh, I'm sorry, the science is settled. My mistake for being a climate denying bigot. But again, these are the people who will talk about climate change and why we're all going to die on a Wednesday, but we'll spend Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday talking about trannies, etc., etc. Excuse me if I'm not buying your shite.
You know, it's spectacularly outrageous for what it is. And one of the hot potatoes is obviously climate refugees that's obviously going to be coming out in abundance because obviously Western nations will need to play their part for the prosperity and longevity of peoples further abroad. Now, here's some figures for you, right, folks? In 6 years, David Cameron let in 3.9 million people. Theresa May, in 3 years, let in 2.2 million people. In 3 years, Boris Johnson let in 3.1 million people. And Fishy Rishi has already let in 1.6, which totals to 10.8 million people thus far over what's that, 3, 6, 12, maybe about 17 and a half year period. Now, doesn't seem like a lot, but given the contrast of, for example, Scotland, that's more than double the entire population of Scotland flooded into a country that is already crippled. And I know there'll be light scattered, but our public services are already crippled. Our health services crippled. Our schools crippled. Our housing situation crippled. It's a global manufacturing for social decline to obviously bring in the Great Reset, to bring in these new Green Deals, so that it causes a deterrent to such a point where people will be willfully in a position to submit to the tyrannical boot of the globalist regime. People will be worried about the sun exploding in 6 billion years' time. They'll be worried about the rising tidal waves coming, despite the elite buying coastal properties in an abundance. They'll be worried about food and water, which, by the way, folks, 2024 is going to be the year of water conversation, water conservation, water rationing. You watch it, 2023, that went right under the radar. Not many people paid attention to that conversation, but it happened in a very big way. And with all these things combined, when people are looking at their children, when people are looking at their loved ones, vulnerable people, they are going to absolutely submit because the damage has already been done with these subtle conditioned fear porn campaigns. And before you know it, you will be locked into a system in a smart grid city, living with people that absolutely hate you, that will be waiting for the first minute to have a pop at you. They will have the rule of the land, and your government will do absolutely nothing about it, and it will all be in the name of the greater good for the greater sustainable global project and to play your part. That is exactly what's going to happen. And I completely back up everything that DJ just said there as well. If you have anything else to add, mate, please fire away.
No, water. In fact, the stream that we did with William a while ago, we touched upon the water stuff. Sort of, it's like deep within Scottish government documentation. There's like sort of references to it, and of course, sustainable development. And forgive me because I don't know which one it is, but there was, if I'm not mistaken, a goal specifically geared towards water. I most certainly believe that there will be more controls over that. I mean, if I remember rightly, it was in the context at the time of they were blaming climate change for something in what is that? Oh, algae. That was it. They were on about algae in certain locks that was spreading because of climate change, and as a result, if it continued to grow at the rate that it was, then like sort of drastic actions were going to have to be put into place to control the water. So I can most certainly see conversations of that nature continuing on and off in the foreseeable future, without a doubt. But just on the reference there to sustainable, like, that is the most like overused quip from politicians in our parliament. You know, every speech that they conduct and every back and forth that they have where they sort of exchange speeches to one another. You'll never once see an organic conversation in the Scottish Parliament. I'm not entirely sure if Westminster's any different, but in the Scottish Parliament, it is the most laughable shite that you will ever see if you spend any time watching the shite show. It will be politician A reading a question of his script, right, that he didn't write himself, a civil servant did, and then the person that he's directed that question to, they will in turn open up their paper and respond to this question that they had prior knowledge of, and their response is written out for them and is written by yet again another civil servant. Never at any point is it ever organic, has to be said, right? But like the term sustainable just comes up constantly now, and I can't help but feel that it's sort of it's a means to sort of indicate that this is what's happening. It's a sustainable development regime, right? Of course it is. That's why everything's about sustainability. You hear it all the time. And I suppose this kind of brings us back to what we were on about earlier regarding CUF, and even a wee bit further forward after that when we're talking about the sort of Russia stuff as well. I've always found this a very interesting point, that at the beginning of 2020, before any of this sort of stuff happened, right at the very start of 2020, Antonio Guterres, the United Nations fat, overweight, rotund Portuguese chief in command, Antonio Guterres, with his little New Year's speech, the UN's New Year's speech, right? He came out and he did his usual shite you would expect from a politician or not. "Oh, I wish everybody a happy new year, blah, blah, blah." But then he made a very important reference that he said that the 2020 starts the beginning of the decade of action. Right? Now, if you do any digging into the decade of action, you would come to find on the United Nations own webpage, they have a whole section dedicated to the decade of action. Now, the decade of action was 10 years to effectively change things for the better, where it says that the decade of action is the acceleration of the transformation of our societies in order to reach the 2030 targets by 2030. Then you fast forward just a few months later, and what do you know? We have the CUF. And wouldn't you know, everything that followed very quickly after that fact was the breakdown of our economies, the emphasis on oil and gas being an issue, and all these green little policies coming out of the woodwork, these places for people's programs, etc., etc. The groundworks have been laid. Fast forward to the Russia shit. There's your perfect example to start your green revolution post-COVID, right? And all of these things from day dot have always been about achieving the sustainable development goal targets. Now, you could make the argument that since 2020 to the point that we're at now, we have seen an absolute acceleration in the direction of all things sustainability. So again, to sort of conclude my little point there, isn't that funny when you think about the decade of action? We seem to be well on course to achieving our targets, something that wouldn't have been possible prior to 2020 and all that followed. So much so that, for examples that I've got on my channel where I've clipped the likes of Nicola Sturgeon, making reference to the fact that if it wasn't for the crisis, quote unquote, that we find ourselves within, we wouldn't be able to make these changes, right? These are quotes and clips that I've got where they're making reference to COVID being an opportunity to change things for the better, right? And let's also not forget the elephant in the room of the continuous, insufferable quotes, such as building back better for a sustainable green future. All so fucking convenient that we're in the midst of a pandemic, but you know what's going to happen post-pandemic, and that is that everything will be sustainable and green. Screams out to me we're all playing our parts.
Yeah, I mean, the terminologies and the buzzwords have been very consistent, should I say, over the last few years, and I think anybody that watches your content, mate, would be the first to point out you've got an abundance of resources available on your channel to back that up. The legwork that you put in, honestly, mate, is completely underrated. And I suppose in many aspects undervalued. It, truly, I'm not saying that to blow smoke up your arse. I'm saying that because that's genuinely um, how I feel about it. But you had said about the economy's taking a hit, crashing them, and all the rest of it. It's funny because Scottish Express done an article, and the headline was Nicola Sturgeon wrapped over shoddy COVID-19 cash accounts as SNP under fire for losing track of £11.8 billion. Folks, £11.8 billion. Now, the amount of businesses that went broke, the amount of people that lost homes, the amount of people that lost savings, the amount of people that lost loved ones with no access to go and visit dying relatives. All this happened under the guise of COVID. COVID was just a toolkit for the first stage enactment of tearing down your society in the order of the new Green Deal. There's no ifs or buts about it. It's all interlinked. It fits like a glove. Comes together like a Rubik's Cube. All these things are a blueprint to the eventuality, as we had said earlier on, where you're pretty much under the tyrannical boot of the globalist regime, under the quote unquote Great Reset. And that's no US fear porn. This is an actual thing. You can go and find the materials on their own websites. This isn't Scott Salmer and DJ saying this for a laugh. This is a very well written, well planned, well oiled, well rehearsed, well scripted, well ran campaign. And I think we had discussed about this on the stream that you done the other night, mate. And I had brought up when Charles was talking at some fucking COP event, and he was talking about when push comes to shove, talking about an individual of his resources and his wealth with the private sector, and it's going to need to take the military campaign. And I had said that I believe that military campaign is for the United Nations soldiers that are up and down the country in hotels, like other places in Europe, all sitting ready to go. They already have their pawns in place. They already have their bishops on the move. They already have their knights moving up and down the board, and they're just waiting for that checkmate piece. But the thing is, folks, it's like anything else in life. How much will you have for your own sovereign self, and how much you consent to being done, or how much you consent to comply with, is a whole other story. You allow yourself to be consumed by that, you'll be swallowed in. You stand upright, you use your will, you use your sovereign self as an objection to say, I'm not going to comply with that. Will do you solid. I'm not saying you're going to change the world, but one man's actions, one man's example can give hope and lead other people into an example for pushback. And there will be pushback with this. For how great or small the numbers are, I can't say for sure, but there will be pushback with it nonetheless. Now, on the aspect with water, right, and you'd brought up the point with the algae in the loch. I remember seeing something subtly about that. I think that might have been earlier on this year or last summer. Wasn't it like several years ago? It was definitely within like the last year. But the thing that puzzled me was it seems to be like a common denominator. It seems to be happening quite a lot over the last few years now. Mark had put a comment in saying blue-green algae is a response to heavy metal poisoning from geoengineering. I don't know if that's true, but I'm going to take it on face value that Mark there knows what he's talking about, and that is absolutely correct. And there's one thing that I will say about William, and for the folks that don't know, when we reference the name William, that's a lad Felgen that we've had on the channel before. That's life, but not as we know it is the name of his channel.
A
And
man
he,
who's arguably more unreliable than me when it comes to Telegram. Anyway.
but on geoengineering, he has an abundance of content about it. He goes right into the nitty gritties with your NASA's, the military, industrial complexes, etc. So if you want to check anything along those lines out, get yourself over to William's channel, and there's an abundance of materials there that you can check out. Now, if again Mark was correct, and I'm taking that on face value, DJ, that it is, and it is metal poisoning for the waters and stuff, right? That literally goes into the old saying, you know, the I don't know if you know the scenario, but I remember reading about this. This was years ago when I was at school, and I think it was in America, right? It was in like some state like a Utah or a Idaho, and basically what they had done is they had poisoned the drinking wells, and a lot of people were getting sick, kind of like an Aaron Brockovich situation.
Oh, I
But
remember that. I can't remember what's the Vermont? Am I wrong there?
I don't know, mate, because the thing that I had read wasn't in relation to Aaron Brockovich, but the scale of how this played out was pretty much like this. But what the American government did in a strange way was they poisoned
Flint,
the water
Michigan.
wells, right? Kind of like COVID with the mRNA, just to see how things were going to react. People got sick, and then they basically gave them this contaminated water to see if it would combat pretty much against what they had put in the water, but it killed off people a whole lot quicker. And effectively, what the government done was is they just basically went in, closed it off, shut the place down for like 20 to 30 years, I think, and moved entire families all over the country. And it was basically like just sealed off by the government for a long time. I don't even know if it's been reintroduced for families to move back there. But this was something that happened in perhaps the 1950s, if I'm right. And that was down to like a geoengineering experiment that apparently they knew at that point in time was terribly wrong. It was basically going to bring the numbers down. So be it. I think if I'm correct in saying it, it was Idaho, and I think it was to deal with cons.
It was my missus yet again in the chat. It was Flint, Michigan.
They were wanting to conserve like land and stuff like that, so the government basically got it for next to nothing. And I suppose this is where it ties in with. No, this is just a theory. Right? This isn't me like saying this is how it's playing it in Scotland, but this is just a theory. A lot of folk that live in rural areas, we know that they want to get them off the off the land and into these future smart cities. And if you're finding reoccurring themes with the algae water situation, which would kind of be detrimental to a lot of people who live in rural Scotland, if they're somewhat isolated, that could possibly be the way to go.
Well, on top of that as well, there's all this talk of land reform in Scotland going forward again, the Greens per usual. And I mean, I'm not the most versed on all things land reform, admittedly, partly because there's not a great deal out there as of yet on the matter, but effectively it does boil down to putting heavy emphasis on the individuals who own the vast majority of land across Scotland, and by hook or by crook, trying to get them to give up some off, if not all of their land. And I think, obviously, hypothetically speaking, in the future, they would like to see literally no land being in private hands. But I don't know if that's really relatable to the sort of shit that was going on regarding the algae narrative. But the only thing I found very peculiar about that, and I remember highlighting it at the time when we did the stream with William, was the fact it was their sort of solution to the problem if it continued to get worse, and that was to sort of effectively take control of lochs across Scotland. And the part of the stories that were being thrown around at the time from the BBC and whatnot was that people were being encouraged to stay away from them, so much so that if it continued, then they wouldn't allow for people to be able to drink the water and whatnot. Now, that's obviously on the face of it fine and dandy if there's blue algae, on the surface, etc. Like, obviously, you don't want people to drink it, but it was more the fact that they felt entitled to be able to clamp down on, public water, effectively, if you will. It was just water in the middle of the countryside. They were able to clamp down on that and, by extension, prohibit you from being able to go near it nor consume it. Now, you fast forward to some sort of doomsday scenario where you can't get water from your tap. If they've got these metrics in place, you wouldn't even be able to go to a loch and consume water or find water. You wouldn't be allowed to, you could say, because of these sort of metrics that have been put in place. So, whenever the government talk about things that they wish to put in place or they might put in place, well, allegedly for your safety and for your protection, it's just one step too many in the direction of tyranny, quite frankly. They have absolutely no business taking over locks. They have absolutely no business dictating where you can and cannot go in regards to the land reform and whatnot. They have absolutely no business in doing anything other than what allegedly governments are for, which is being government servants. No, public servants, sorry. Seems to be like a forgotten trope at this point, in all seriousness. Once upon a time, people were put into these positions, voted in by the public, and they would enact what they were voted in for. For some strange reason, there's been a 180 flip in recent years, for as long as I can remember, where effectively we do whatever the fuck they tell us to do. When did that happen? I don't know. Right? Can't really put my finger on when exactly. But again, just let me emphasize that public servants, it's about time maybe they started acting as such. But the blue algae thing, I don't necessarily know if it's got anything to do with what was referenced earlier on. I'm not going to sit here pretend I know anything about it, in all honesty, but I have been to a few lochs over the years with my dog, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes there's been signs that have been sort of nailed onto trees nearby, warning individuals not to get too close to the water or to let their dogs near the water because there's currently blue algae growing on the surface. But it was the fact at the time, when we were the articles and whatnot that we were referring to, they were blaming climate change. This is climate change related algae. This is super climate
Well,
change algae.
do
Right,
you
so we might have to
remember
step in.
during COVID? Very quickly before I make that point, Angle, thanks for dropping in. Really appreciate it. Bass, likewise, mate. Good Christmas. I hope you and yours had a good one, mate. For myself and DJ and Clive. Do you remember during COVID though? Because basically nobody was meant to be out, in case you'd get fucking took to the local gulag. That they were showing you pictures up and down the country, even places in England where they were saying this place was hoaching bacteria contaminated water because of the lockdowns. They have reversed this and now they're habitable and they're clean and they're
Yeah,
pure and the wildlife is thriving, like as if it's something out of fucking Bambi scene.
yeah,
And I
I do
believe it was
remember
like subtle
that.
things like that, subtle conditioning where people would go, oh, you know what, that actually worked during lockdown. So if they were going to enforce climate lockdowns, fantastic. I'd be more than happy to that because it means the local ducks wouldn't be swimming in shitey water.
Aye. With the climate stuff, you've just seen a continuation of the narrative that was taking place prior to that, which, as you make reference to there, was COVID, in the sense that it became pretty clear with things like that. Then you also seen additional videos and whatnot of like wildlife starting to appear in, major cities because there's no people about, etc., etc. We were the problem. People were the problem, right? We are the virus. We are the problem. You fast forward to the COVID narrative, not sorry, the climate narrative, and the same thing is pretty apparent. It's just an extension and a continuation of CO2 is the problem, or is it us that are the problem? It's us that are the problem. Less people, less stress in the planet, less CO2 is what they're asking for or angling for. What they really mean is us. They want less people, So it's just a continuation of the previous narrative. And I mean, yeah, to some that sounds like fear porn, that sounds conspiratorial in nature. But I mean, let's be honest here. Is it really? Because they keep talking about overpopulation. That's one of their narratives that they love to brandish about the place as of late. And one of the things that they say in order to reduce, global emissions is less people. There's a heavy, heavy emphasis on this, So I don't quite frankly feel that I'm wrong to suggest that is the case. I mean, they make no secret of it. And I do think, as you made reference to as well, that you sort of see the initial stages of that during COVID. That has to be said. Look at all the deer that are shitting on high street pavements. That's because you're not there. Look how wonderful and lovely this is. It's beautiful, beautiful scenes. We're actually achieving our climate targets this year because nobody's about and they're polluting cars. I mean, it's wonderful. Fast forward to where we are now with all the current thing. Same fucking thing. They've just worded it ever so slightly different. The issue's always been us, the useless eaters, the CO2 emitters, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the language is pretty telling. The way that they're building the picture and laying it out for you is very telling. But I think a lot of people, by a lot of part, when you see them, I suppose, adopting this message, aren't necessarily bad. I just think that they're that consumed on the fear porn side of it. Like, they allow that to consume them rather than just trying to be environmentally friendly, which, on the aspect of being environmentally friendly, isn't a bad thing. People want clean water, people want clean parks, people want to have beautiful, natural, scenic routes that they can take and go and walk like yourself. You do with a wee dog. People like to go and walk the main roads. We all want that, but the scale in the narrative being pushed by these globalist cartels is it pretty much that you are a biological hazard to this
Right.
world, and that is where I suppose you use the word conspiratorial, but this is where you peel back another layer of the onion, and this is where it becomes a depopulation issue.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other way to get round about that. Sadly, for a lot of folks, maybe they switch off when you hear things like that because maybe it frightens them or maybe they don't want to believe it. But that is the true intent and sadly the true nature of what's at hand.
Yeah. I mean, they do make no secret of this long-term goal. That's ideally what they would like to see. But sadly, for us, this largely affects us more than it does affect any other group of individuals across the planet. I mean, I'm the first to admit, I mean, there is, in certain sectors across society, worldwide even, too many people. There is, right? Africa's bursting at the seams, part of India bursting at the seams and whatnot. But that's really where it starts and ends. Like, if you've got an issue with that too many people, procreating in these parts of the world, take it up with them. But they make it a global issue as if we all have to play our part and whatnot. And sadly, a lot of their issues seem to be directed at us when we're not the problem. Right? There's only a problem because of certain parts of the world, right? But there's no heavy emphasis and attention and whatnot directed specifically on those quarters. It's a global issue and whatnot. So any hypothetical thing that they put into place to clamp down on birth rates will have a diametric influence on us as opposed to them. And you're seeing that now anyway. Even like the stupid narratives that you keep seeing over the years, like that people in Britain aren't having children because they're feared for the future, or there's too many people, so people, women aren't having children, etc., etc. Is this same propaganda being applied to people in Africa and Bengal? No, it's not. It's it's very one-sided, despite the fact we are not the problem. And I've always had a bit of an issue with that because, yes, on the one hand, they want global depopulation, but it's pretty apparent to me that they are targeting us, our nations, as opposed to targeting the individuals who are the fucking problem.
There's two things right before we pull it, before we pull the chat back and start winding down for the night. Do you remember the campaign that they done? Now, this is going back about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it was like basically a picture of somebody's granny. You know how like they add in like quotations, and it's
Uh,
like I would gladly have an early end to life if it meant my grandchildren could get to the same age as me in a clean world where it's no basically like overrun and there's enough food to go around, right? This was a
mm.
real thing, mate, right? Swear to God, an absolute real thing. For the folk that are in the chat, I'll try and dig it out because I came across this when we used to do the Sunday streams all the time. And I dare say, I think this goes back to when I used to do a Thursday stream and a Sunday stream. That's how
Fuck
fucking.
hell, that's going way back, man.
Mhm. But I remember seeing this and it was like horrified. And it was basically like they were trying to like intimidate grandparents into basically, yeah, if I'll happily go and like, so that the kids have a future. But it kind of got me thinking right at the time, and I never really thought much about it because it was like maybe for like a month or two. But I recently seen something in Britain that they're talking about bringing in a right to the end of life process,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
And with that, a lot of people who have chronic conditions, they're going to basically be in pain all their days. They're going to bring this out and they're going to go, it's to let people die with dignity. And fair
Mm.
enough, right? I don't agree with it. Fair enough if that's somebody's imperial choice that they're in pain every day and they're not going to get any better and they want a thing, right? As draconian as I think it is, fair enough, right? Okay, that's fine. But with things like this, right, it always has a flip side to it, and the flip side is going to be that will extend to people with mental health issues, whether it's bipolar disorder, PTSD, anxiety, people who fall under brackets of vulnerability, poverty, working poor, people in poor environments. There will be such a vast net where collectively people who aren't in the right frame of mind, people who have, what do you call that? Oh my God, I'll say self control on how they can handle their emotions and their mental well being will be in the firing line for that. And I think things like this are going to come out in such a large scale over the next few years, and it will be horrifying because we had seen a couple of incidents play out in Canada where, I think they were basically alluding to if there was people that were deemed a threat to the nation, people who weren't basically on the communist narrative on board with it could be deemed an enemy of the state and could be pretty much liable and fit the criteria to be put into something like this. I'm not bullshitting you. This was pretty much just before COVID or just after COVID came out. This was the language that certain people in the Canadian Parliament were coming out and saying. Safe to say that it's not being enacted yet, but you know yourself, mate. They people get something in an inch, that becomes a mile very quickly down the line.
I think assisted dying, especially in the Canadian context, is probably the most clear cut example of a slippery slope fallacy. In terms of it was obviously back in the day advertised and promoted as people with terminal illnesses, and it's seemed since then got to such a point where suicidal people and homeless folks have been offered a way out. That's not what was promoted nor advertised and whatnot. That's not what was sold to the public at the time. But yet here we are. And yeah, across the Atlantic, we're now seeing it. It's going to be next year, I believe. We are going to see it. It's not a UK thing, it's a Scottish thing. We're going to see that being debated, quote unquote, in our parliament, courtesy of some bobag from the Lib Dems. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's putting the bill forward and it's going to be, quote unquote, debated at a later date. But yeah, we're effectively following the Canadian model in that respect, and it's pretty fucking sinister, really. I mean, I have no qualms per se with the idea of somebody who's no, not Alex Coleman, the guy that does the he's the convener sometimes. when the other woman's no there. I can't remember his name. But anyway, I have no qualms with somebody who's terminally ill looking for a way out to sort of end their pain and whatnot. That's fine, but that's sadly how they're selling it. I want you to to support that. They'll tug at your heartstrings, emotionally speaking, to accept this. But just look at Canada. It has grown arms and legs. And it's now at a point where like homeless people and whatnot are being offered a way out. It's fucking insanity, you know.
PJ,
Yeah.
see that's what PBC's just put up. Sold as for terminally ill and now pushing for kids to be allowed to die.
Mhm.
You know, see, I've never really thought about it before, right? And I know I had kind of alluded to like the mental health thing, right? But see the
Mhm.
amount of people that you're seeing that's kind of going through that whole I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, and I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, then what 2 or 3 years when they realise that the mum and dads are fucking nutcases and they realise what they've done, they go into deep depressions. These
Yeah.
kids are going to fall into brackets like that as well.
Hmm.
The sad, tragic thing with the amount of mental condition that's been done within the schooling environment and the liberal home, there's a lot of kids, you know, that quite frankly are going to be at risk, and that's absolutely heartbreaking. That.
There's no end to the amount of different categories of individuals, young or older, that this could effectively affect in the future. But as was referenced by myself and then by PBC, sold as something for the terminally ill, and it's very difficult to argue against that. Like, why should you prohibit a terminally ill person from being able to end things in a peaceful manner and end their suffering? But sadly, that's not what it ends. That's simply the mechanism that's been used to get it through parliaments and get it into law and whatnot, you know? But just obviously, in a sort of side note, before we sort of wrap things up, that sort of ties into another issue, especially in Scotland, that is quite saddening, really. And that's obviously alcohol related deaths, homelessness and homeless deaths on the rise, suicides on the rise, drug deaths sort of on the rise. I can't remember the figures, but they're not as high as they were the year prior, but they're still pretty high. And you have to sort of compare that to I think it's all a damning indictment of society, really, in the sense that not even just this cost of living shite, right? Even before that, but ever more so now. I think the absolute state of our society is a true reflection of how far we've fallen as a nation, really, when you compare that to how we were historically. Billy Big Balls with our fucking kilts on and whatnot. And now look at the state of our societies where we're being lambasted with every false political narrative going in the mainstream, a government who are simply there to act as puppets on behalf of a regime that's out with our control. And on top of it all, our own people are suffering with a myriad of different issues, like some of the ones I've just mentioned there. And there's absolutely no recourse, nothing being done to actually get to the root cause of the issues. It's all very well and good to pay the occasional bit of lip service to problems and pretend that you're going to fix problems. But I think the true problem here is the fact that our society has fallen to such a degree is probably why so many of our own people are ending up in the positions that they're in. And it's very difficult to sort of be in favor of, oh, just let the refugees and whatnot. Like, there's an expression that seems to have died a death in recent years, especially, and as that charity begins at home. And I think that that expression existed for as long as it did for a reason. There was once upon a time where we would prioritize our own, and instead of that, especially where young white men are concerned, but not limited to, but especially where young white men are concerned, we are absolutely, as a society, failing these individuals, whether it be in school or whether it be in later life, whether we're chastising them through every means possible, media wise and educational wise, whether we're just allowing them to fall behind in school, whether it's the environments and the areas they live being completely devoid of any funding, etc., we are just witnessing the absolute disregard of our one of two most important demographics, and that is our white men.
You know, I completely agree with that. I think for the longest time in the West, and you could extend the exact same to England and Wales and Ireland, our country has been morally and spiritually broke by cultural erosion through educational and institutional media propaganda campaigns that have, instead of spreading positivity, brotherhood, unity, community, loving your neighbour, being a decent role model in your community, pushing to be a hard-working individual. They have divided the family through cultural Marxism, through the battle of gender, using the toolkit of feminism, allowing women to become whores and think of motherhood as nothing more than a vilified burden that is a toxic trait of expectancy from a toxic masculine individual. We have had a government that has robbed the people blind. They have taxed and taxed and taxed and came up with taxes and came up with new improved taxes and evaded the the people of their true wealth on this country. We have become a nation of pacifists, of broken alcoholics, of desperate drug users, of declining excellency, and it's all interlinked. Sadly, it truly is. But the I suppose the great thing with people, if you're looking at this for historical aspect of the European people, not just the Scottish, but the European people right across the board, they have always went through phases of real brokenness. And see, sometimes, as harsh as this is going to sound, brokenness is the response to the self healing. Because in order to be broken, one or a people must go through and endure an absolute torrent time to be humbled, to reconnect, to learn, to self identify. And I suppose by some degree in this country, we have been through that because we have lost a sense of touch, a sense of identity, a sense of self awareness, a sense of self control, a sense of ability, and a sense of motivation. We have lost all these things, and these were things that were ingrained in generations, I dare say, that right down to perhaps our granddads. A couple of years, shifts with certain attitudes in generations is, totally skyrocketed all these problems. But the thing with being broken is that when you're down on your knees, you're really desperate and despair, you can't go any further. The only place that you can do is look up. It's the only place that you can see. And it just takes one person to find herself onto their knees. And that one person that gets onto their knees reaches their hand out and that pulls up another. You teach one, you teach one, you come together, you heal, and you build. And we'll go through that process. It might happen in your lifetime, it might not. But the point that I'm making is we're going through this cycle, and I think we're coming up to the end of the cycle where there's going to be a lot of self reflection, and a lot of young men out there who are lost are going to find a way. They're going to become into a position of whether it's going to the gym, whether it's finding some kind of self confidence, whether it's finding a friend. They will definitely find a way, and they will self heal. They will build. They will create stronger men. They will create stronger communities. And with that, there will be stronger values. There will be stronger cultural identifiers, there will be stronger bonds, there will be stronger relationships, which means there'll be stronger and healthy family units. And I think there's a lot of positivity to look ahead for these things because it's something that's exciting. It's something that I think that we all want. It's something that I believe that this country and our people absolutely thrive upon. You know, we're just in that generation where we don't have an absolute physical war, it's a spiritual war. And people might disagree with us, but that's the hardest war imaginable because that's something that rots for the inside out. And God willingly, we will overcome and we will be fine.
I think that's probably a good way to end things, to be honest. I'm not going to make the mistake of trying to add anything on to your well-worded speech there. Fallen for that a few times over the years, like, I'm not about to fall for that again. I think that's a good way to end it.
Well, would you like to say goodbye to folk in the chat and let them know anything that's planned for 2024, mate?
Aye, well, thank you very much for the people who have been in the comments. I don't have it open in another tab in terms of like how many people have been watching and whatnot. Was a bit impromptu, but from what I can see here, PBC and Mark Ritchie have been pretty frequent throughout the entirety of us streaming and whatnot. So appreciated to the periods, but not limited to the others that have been there, obviously. But it was obviously impromptu. As far as me promoting anything or plans that I had, nah. It's always sort of unexpected as far as I'm concerned when it comes to streams or videos and whatnot. Like there was once upon a time where you could predict that there'll be a video at some point. Not so much nowadays. Took my foot off the pedal at the start of this year. I'm not about to put it back on in all fairness. So nah, not really. What I will say though, folks, is you might very well see a sort of increase at some point next year of Sunday with the lads. Not necessarily with Clive at the helm as often as we would all like, but you might very well see the pair of us at least going forward at a later date. But that's a topic of discussion for another time.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's going to be a lot of room for, as we've already been talking in the background, about somewhat regular streaming, and it's something that I think that can be managed. So we'll keep you guys in the loops for that. Because definitely 2024, I think, will be a year of positive outlooks. Positive outlooks, to definitely say the least. But definitely PVC and for Mark, you know, you guys have been brilliant in the chat throughout the stream. Really appreciate that. I also want to say thanks to Scott Webb for potting by, Anglo-Saxon, Bass, Linda, Budgie Burger for coming along, and everybody else that's tuned down back and forth and maybe, you know,
Mate,
gave the
I think
stream
we
a
were
like.
I think we were stream cucking William, man.
You know, I kind of alluded to this at the start of the stream because it was so kind of a like off cuff. I don't even know who's
Oh,
streaming
shit.
at the moment or what, and I kind of like gave my apologies because, truth be told, we wanted to have a stream, but we just let's be honest. It's Sunday's what Hogmanay. I don't think that would have been a good window for MD. You're doing
Yeah.
it. You're good ladies, and everyone's busy and frantic because I want to bring in the new year, which is
Mhm.
great. And you know, it's a celebration. So for MD, that feels like you know they've had to go between two streams. Definitely apologise for that. And again, this was
Yeah.
completely off cuff, but for everyone that has came along as well, Linda, I appreciate you. Thanks very much for tuning in and affording some of your time tonight. We will be back in 2024 and hope you've all had a great Christmas and we will see you next year. Good night, take care, and God bless.
Adios.